What's up, folks? Welcome to another episode of the Compulsory podcast or videocast, depending on which way you're listening or watching this. Have another very special guest with me today, and we're going to have some great conversation here. I've got Matt Van Itallie with me. Matt, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
I will, and thanks again, Peter, for having me. I am so excited to spend some time with you. Of course, I'm Matt Van Itallie, founder and CEO of a software company called Sema. And what we do is help explain the technical world of software development to non-technical executives, the C-suite and the board of directors. We started with a set of products that help summarize the state and health of a code base. Think of it as non-functional requirements or code base health into something like a credit score to help boards of directors and executive teams understand. And over the last year, we've had the great honor partnering with some of our clients to be building tools to help engineers and engineering teams adopt AI responsibly and productively. I love to run. I do a little cooking and baking with my daughter when I can, and I'm just so happy to be here.
Oh, fantastic. You know, just by the description alone, folks, I think we can all agree you're the superheroes that we've always needed as developers, right? Because you know, you are very much going to be the folks that's like, we're going to describe what these crazy people do to the folks that need to understand it. So you're our superheroes right there, Matt. So thank you for that.
Well, with respect, and I promise this won't be confrontational, I do not think that we are the superheroes. And it's a good excuse for me to tell you about the name of our company. So it's Sema, S-E-M-A. The famous Sema is a car show, Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association. Not the same. We're not the same Sema. We were founded by. We were founded. Our name came from, I should say, a famous monk who brought Buddhism from India to China. So united two different cultures, two extraordinary cultures, and shared ideas between them. His name, and I don't speak Sanskrit, so I'm going to do my best, was Lokasema. Okay. L-O-K-A-K. S-E-M-A, and it was such a powerful story of translating from one world to the other. And I really think that what Sema does, we are not the heroes here. The heroes are the folks doing the work, carrying out the craft of coding. We're here to help translate and make it make sense to non-technical executives who may not know what a refactoring is or may not know why technical debt should be paid down. But it's definitely just like the translators, just like Lokasema translated an existing text, and all kudos to the creators of that. We pay homage to the folks doing the real work of coding.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you because, you know, let's put it this way. We need each other, right? I think that's probably the best way, right?
We can agree on that. Go.
Yeah, we're all part of the one big family that makes cool things, and that's what it comes down to, right? So let's dive into this here. So, you know, you take the craziness that we do, make it understandable, analyze it, I think is perhaps the more accurate way, and then break it down into, would it be fair to say, understandable chunks of information that then relate to other folks? Because I know what you mean, right? Anytime, you know, I get into those meetings in my day job, folks on the podcast know this, I'm an engineering manager. And, you know, we get into those discussions where at some point the engineers or the engineering team always says, well, we have to do these refactoring things because we do. And then we get that look, right? That's like, but this is time and money. You gotta explain this better, right? So, you know, I know that you have a suite of tools and I've been reading up on them, but let's dive into how this works, right? Because you have these very intelligent systems that essentially look at the work that us as engineers create and then gives back information in, I guess, I would say sensible English instead of code speak, right?
Yeah, a lot of what we do has to do with summarizing and contextualizing the results that engineers are used to seeing every day. Let's take a really simple example of in-file security warnings, SAST, the ones that would be detected by a high-quality SAST or DAST tool. It's one thing to say, we have 100 high-risk security warnings. We should tackle them. That sounds right,
yep.
right? It sounds right. But here, the following sentences are easier for other audiences to understand. Our code base is in the growth stage, and growth stage code bases have been around for 2 to 5 years and have 25 to 50 developers working on them. We're in that stage. Compared to all other companies all other code bases in that stage, we're in the bottom quartile, having 100 high-risk security warnings, meaning 75%, at least 75% of similar companies have fewer security warnings. Now, in practice, maybe non-technologists don't know this, but I'll tell them here, and they learn it when they work with Sema. Every company has security debt. Every company has technical debt. If you got everything to perfect, you wouldn't be able to ship anything. But staying away from the bottom is a good idea. And so saying, listen, we're in the bottom quartile, let's get to the second quartile, maybe even the first. We're not going to get to 0, but let's put that in context. Oh, and by the way, security warnings take, SaaS warnings take on average 4 hours to fix. And so we're looking at 3 person months to fix all of them. So all of a sudden, everybody on this podcast, listening to this podcast, knows what a SaaS warning is and knows how to count them. But if you can express it at a more abstract level, well, this compared to what? And what is the tax on the roadmap? Because it is a tax. Sometimes you have to pay taxes, of course, otherwise functions don't work. But putting it in a way that people can understand the trade-offs without having to get into the tech behind it, that's a lot. That's a simple example of what Sema does, of trying to contextualize it, summarize it, and then express it in relative terms and in especially in terms of engineers' time to address.
It's a fascinating way to describe it, because as you're going through and explaining there, I'm thinking to myself, as you're going through, I'm running through sort of my typical day, right, where I've got, packages getting updated. Next thing you know, and I think, we see more and more of this now. And I think that's why it's so important for, companies and services like yourself. We see so much of this happening so quickly. I could fix, let's say that I could somehow do the hypothetical, never going to happen, fix 100% of my issues today. And I'm working through, I've cleared out my Jira tickets for the day, going home, feeling good. Come back in the morning.
Time for a break.
Hey everybody, it's Peter Whittam here from the Compulsive Podcast. I'm going to tell you about SetApp. SetApp is a service that provides a subscription fee of just $10 a month, and you get access to over 200 Mac applications, and it's also available now on iOS as part of that deal. I use the service because it just has a ton of really good first-rate apps that I use all the time. And for me, it's invaluable as a developer to have access to tools for things like APIs, for planning projects, writing emails, writing documentation. And you can get all of these things, including database apps, all of that kind of stuff, right there on the SetApp service for just $10 a month. You can use as many or as few applications as you need. If you're interested in checking this out, go to peterwhittam.com, peterwhitham.com/SetApp, SETAPP, and you can see the details there. And it's got a link that you can go over and start using the service and see how it works out for you. I strongly recommend this to every Mac user.
Break time over.
Whole new bunch of security warnings because, some third-party library, and whether we like it or not, these days we pretty much are going to depend on at least one, more likely, tens to hundreds, depending on your platform of choice and so on. Something happens and overnight I come back and I'm like, where did these 50, 100 new warnings come from? And it's, then like you say, there's this breakdown of, well, it's a warning. How much of a warning is it? When I'm looking at them, I say to myself, okay, how bad is this really? Is this an edge case? Is this a critical problem right now? And then the next question that always comes up in my head is, somehow I got to figure out how to explain this to the folks outside of engineering who need to understand this is really important and we need to do this now, or we can do this a month from now, something like that, right? And so the services and the tools that you offer sounds like that's a really good way to back up the reasoning as to how we reach these conclusions, right?
Well, you're very kind to say it, but I would say in that situation, Peter, you don't need a tool like Sema's to do that. It's always about putting it in context, and it's having the prioritization conversation first. And I know everybody listening to this, and certainly myself included, we've all worked on things that, in hindsight, we didn't need to do. And I think it was Peter Drucker, a theorist of management, who said the most inefficient thing there is something that isn't worth doing in the first place. And so it's so hard, but it's also so tempting to take the next thing in front of us, especially if it's something in our comfort zone, even if it takes some thinking work, or maybe especially if it takes some thinking work, and just tackle that. The hard part is stopping and thinking, should we do this? Is this really the highest and best use of my time advancing the product's goals, our users' goals, our company's goals? My experience, and I guess the segue, my experience on security debt is there are very, very few executive leadership teams, very few, who have the skill, but even have the interest in knowing the details of what security warnings should be fixed and why. And my experience, the best tactic is to agree on an overall framework. And I don't mean that to be fancy. I just mean like, listen, in our business, given what we do, we're going to ignore the low priority SaaS warnings or CVs, doesn't matter, or mediums. We're going to do the highs in customer-facing code. Highs in code that is safely behind firewalls isn't going to be a threat. That percentage, which is 10% of the total number of warnings, we're going to tackle. And we're going to always make time for that. I'm only asking for 10% to fix them. I'm not here to say taking up, doing all of the security debt overall. We're going to tackle any of those that are about 10% of the total. We'll never spend more than 20% a sprint on security debt or tech debt. And you have our word that if we ever need to do more, we'll come back and ask for permission. So if you create some outlines of what kind of debt and how much time can be spent on debt. And we talk about code-based health, aka non-functional requirements. I mean, any kind. It could be code quality debt. It could be intellectual property license risk debt. It could be code security debt, whatever it is. See if you can get into an agreement on the big picture, and then you have freedom to make the best engineering choices within that. Because the truth is, as much as it is interesting to the technologists, the executive team, they're just thinking about it in terms of chunks. Sort of back to your previous word. Okay, we're going to spend a chunk of time addressing the health of the code base, and I know that I have this mental model that we're going to spend this much, and if anybody wants to spend more, they're going to have to come and get permission from me. Other than that, I now don't have to worry about it. And that from an executive perspective, just explaining just enough of what they need to know, not to hide things, but just give them enough to make decisions is a huge part of communicating effectively, and therefore getting the permission, getting the resources, etc., to invest properly in paying down that debt.
Yeah, because I'll freely admit this, as an engineer, and every engineer I've ever known, but I'm sure there's some engineer out there that says that's not me, but they probably know it is them. Anytime we are asked something, or we are asked to look at something, or analyzing a problem, or explaining something, as engineers, we can't help ourselves. We always go too deep, right? Because we have all this knowledge, and it's not a desire to impress people. It's just this kind of habitual thing of, I want to give you all the information I can for you to make the best decision. And sometimes, especially folks outside the inner circle of engineering, they don't need that information. And you have a fine line where there's like a crossover, and sometimes you can sort of tell in meetings or when you're talking with folks between, I've got them, they're understanding it, and now I've gone too far and I've lost them, and they've kind of switched off, right? We see it all the time in the news. Right? This is now, headline stuff, right? So have you seen any trends? Are you finding that more people are receptive to this?
I have. I give a lot of kudos to our amazing engineers and product team at Sema, because, of course, the people I'm talking to are spending a lot of time looking at Sema's reports, and our product team and engineering team has gotten better and better over time at making it digestible to our audiences. We have customers who've seen more than 100 reports on different software organizations, all from Sema. And just like you look at 100 anything, you look at 100 bug tickets, you look at 100 whatever, you really start to understand. I'll tell you something I am pretty proud of, in a way that I think with our customers we've helped shape the conversation a little bit. So we summarize the results about code-based health, and there's about 45 major metrics that do matter, that we do think folks should consider. But of those 45, 12 matter the most, in our opinion, about whether or not a code base is healthy. Again, think of this as a summary of the non-functional requirements. By the way, at the end of this call, there's links. You can read all about them. It's not secret. We love sharing it and getting people.
Yeah, lots of stuff we're going to put in the show notes for folks. Please go read.
Exactly. And we took very opinionatedly, from the 45, we picked 12 that are the most important. And then we gave them weighted possible scores that sum up to 100. Okay. So that we could create kind of like a credit score where 30 to 70 is mature, meaning that code-based health is likely good enough, although you might want to look at some of the risk areas. More than 70 is better than it needs to, but certainly it can be a good spot to be. There's 12. I guess if you did it, if you did it per equally, each one would be 8 points each. If I did that right, 8 and a little bit. But they're not weighted equally. A few measures of the 2 of the 12 are worth 5 points each, and those are intellectual property risk. So copyleft limited, for folks who know this. Not that it's not important, but if you have them, you can fix them. You just need some engineering time to triage and then update. Replace the packages with an appropriate license, or buy the license, or put your usage into proper standing. So those are weighted less. There is one of the 12. I'm going to quiz you, Peter. Not that you should remember it, but just from your expertise, one metric that's worth 25 points out of 100, by far the most important measure of code-based health. You want to guess what it is?
Oh, now, this is a challenge, because I've got my engineering hat on today. I've been doing some coding. So I have been deep in code coverage and testing all day. And, so for me, that's been a big primary one. So I don't know if I'm close, but, certainly that's...
No, very good. Testing is definitely one of the 12. And having great testing, frankly, is like a miner's canary in a good way, that if there's high levels of testing, that the engineering team has gotten the support and to invest in code quality and in code-based health. The single biggest factor about whether or not a code base is healthy is developer retention.
Oh, that is an interesting
it's a good one, right?
With that, yes.
And it's not how you would think. Well, it's got to be number of warnings or something like that. No, because if there are engineers who understand the code that are still there, they can fix pretty much any problem you put in front of them. And if you don't have the expertise, folks who don't, there's no amount of documentation that can make up for not having the folks who know the logic, know the mental model in their heads. Everyone on this, so you asked, have we seen some trends? Sema, I think, has had a little part to play in helping non-technical executives understand that if you have the code, but you don't have the coders, that's like having a half-written novel without the novelist.
Yes.
Everyone here listening knows that, right? Yes, of course. The code is never ending. We're going to keep editing it, and you need the expertise. But I think our emphasis of developer retention, weighting that heavily, and having those kinds of conversations, we've helped shift the conversation a little bit so people know that developer retention is one of the most important drivers of code-based health.
Now, Matt, I got to say, you have hit the nail on the head. And, I almost want to sort of hit myself with the stick a little bit for not recognizing this one as quickly as I should, because this is one that comes up. And I'll ask the audience. I can't see them. I can't hear them. But I'm going to bet most of them are going to put their hands up here. Right? So audience, put your hand in the air if you have ever worked on a project or you've inherited a project and you're working for a company and you hear at least one person say, well, the folks who worked on that, they don't work here anymore, right? Yeah. So that's number one.
Yeah. And Dave Mango is such a smart leader in the world of DevOps, calls low developer retention an anti-pattern. So not only is it a challenge for dealing with having to deal with retraining and hiring, etc., but it really could be indicative of something challenging in the organization. And so it's just so important to understand what the drivers are of people leaving, and what responsible methods are available to make it more likely that you find the right people and then that they stay.
Yeah. Keeping developers, your team happy is always a goal for me, right? There's always going to be issues. There's always going to be product problems. There's always going to be products. There's always going to be new features that are like, we're going to do this. And we all know this. The timelines that you're asked for, they're always going to be crazy. Simple as that. But at the end of the day, if you don't have someone who wants to do the work, or perhaps more importantly, not think of it as work, enjoy those when you find those magic folks who love the challenge, right? It's not about the paycheck attached to it, because you'll never be paid as much as you think you should. Let's get that one out the way too, right? Hey folks, if you like what you're hearing in this podcast and you want to help this podcast to continue going forward and having great guests and great conversations, I invite you to become a Patreon supporter. You can go to patreon.com/CompileSwift, where you will get ad-free versions of the podcast along with other content. Now, I'm going to twist this a little bit here then, because we're getting close to that area that's another topic very hot these days, which is, I'm sure there's some folks out there who are going to say, well, that's where AI comes in and it's going to solve these problems. And for me, I'm one of those folks of, look, AI, is, as great as it is, it's not going to solve your problem. It's probably going to give you a different problem. And, all these models are built around the experience that all these folks have, right? So it's only going to be as good as the model. So if you don't have folks to feed it, you're right back to square one. So how does AI play into, do you use, I know you do in some of your tools, but how does that play into some of this analysis as well? Rather than just you looking at the code, following the patterns, machines can spot things that we just don't see, right?
Exactly. We are very excited. I'm personally very excited, and we as a business are very excited about the potential of generative AI to not only improve organizational productivity, but also improve developers' quality of life. We really think so, and I think the early data suggests that it's true, and it will be continuing. generative AI can, and if you haven't tried it, by all means, if you're not permitted to at work, of course, there are some companies that aren't doing that. Follow those guidance, but do it on your own time and start exploring it. It is a brainstorming aid. It is an interpretation aid. So as challenging as it is to bring on new developers to a project, having someone, it is such a ramp-up tool to, hey, please explain this code to me and what it does. Is an explainer. It's really, really powerful. It can help experiment and troubleshoot. It can help find bugs. Really a partner in your coding that carries a bit of the load. And for folks who are, and I know they're out there, folks who are worried about what does it mean as to be, our identity as a craft person, to use AI, does that really still make me a developer? I know that because there are people at Sema. We're building AI tools. And people at Sema have come to me and said, I just feel so uncomfortable about this. I have a very simple question. Do you use open source? You do. Do you think using open source makes you not a developer?
Good point.
No, of course not. Well, why is that? Well, open source, it avoids me having to reinvent the wheel. It still involves a ton of judgment. The code doesn't build itself. I have an incredibly important role to play, but boy, does it allow me to focus on the things that are the most important. And that, to me, is exactly the same with generative AI. It definitely saves time. It definitely gives a leg up. But man, it is not a replacement for the judgment, for the context providing, for the quality control that engineers must do. It's absolutely critical. It just helps do it. Just like version control systems, just like open source, and now here is this very powerful tool. But it still is a tool for craftspeople to do their best work.
It's interesting as you're going through, and as you were saying there about, do you use open source? It struck me that there's another one here, because see what you think about this, which is, have you ever Googled a problem?
Exactly. Right? Stack Overflow, Google, right? Do you chisel your own microchips? No, of course not, right? Posit a spectrum between doing it completely by yourself to it being totally done for you. Over time, we've gotten more and more powerful tools to help engineers do their work.
Yeah.
And not a substitute, not a substitute for judgment, not a substitute for context and all of that, but certainly a way to help. And I completely agree. It is, in some regards, an extremely powerful Google search. And if you're going to do that, no reason you should feel there's no shame involved in using a tool more custom built to the problems you're trying to solve.
Absolutely. It's funny to me, and I'm always, I use AI, which is I've got to be able to describe to it the problem I've got. Otherwise, I'm on a non-starter, right? And then from there, it's going to give me some suggestions back, exactly as if I was standing at the water cooler talking with one of my coder friends. And that's how I look at it. And I'm going to give a shout out to a friend of mine here. Adam, if you're out there, buddy, I know you listen to the podcast. Shout out to you, because my grand awakening for AI was he has a tool that he makes, Developer Duck. And I challenged it one time, and I took a bunch of my code and put it in the AI chat and said, document my code. And sure enough, it did the most beautiful reasoning of understanding my code and explaining it. And that is when, for me, the light went on of, this is how these tools help me.
Yeah, I love the idea of on everyone's AI journey, starting with some portion of the work that is not very satisfying, and see if an AI tool can help. Because life is short, work is short. If there's parts of your job that are not as compelling as others, by all means, see if a tool can help get you there faster. It's a great suggestion.
Yeah. When you go in and you analyze a code base and things like that, and you're looking presumably for security holes and saying, hey, you really need to pay attention to this.
Yeah. So in the over the last year, we've been working on helping understand how much code was introduced from generative AI, just like how much code came in from open source, to help individual developers and teams and companies manage the risk associated with generative AI. We are incredibly supportive of it, but like any powerful tool, the risks need to be managed. And what we'd say, there's really good news on managing the risks from using generative AI tools to code, which is the risks are manageable. The risks are absolutely manageable. And when you combine it with the benefits to productivity and job satisfaction, it really is a clearly positive thing for organizations to adopt as an organization level and at the individual level. With respect to security, you're exactly right. Just like code you copied from Google, you can't trust, or code you copied from Stack Overflow or wherever, just because it came from somewhere else doesn't mean it should not go through the security gates that the rest of the code that you've written or the team's written has set up. And so exactly as you said, if for some reason you were thinking about using Gen AI code and skipping your quality gates and skipping your security gates, do not do that. Put them through the same ones. But if you put them through the same ones, you will, of code reviews, of your security checks, etc., that is sufficient. That is sufficient, just like using open source that way. On Sema's side, the one extra level besides looking for security warnings, which of course can show up in Gen AI generated code or not, we're looking at by detecting how much generative AI code there is, and of the code that came in, how much of it has been modified. We say blended, as opposed to being purely copy pasted. That's another signal on whether or not the code was sufficiently modified for security, for quality, for understandability. That does not mean that any particular fragment or snippet that you're pulling in from a tool like GitHub Copilot or ChatGPT doesn't mean that one is wrong. It does not. It does mean that if you looked at an entire code base, or 50% of it was pure Gen AI, meaning straight from a prompt to the code base, that level is probably a pretty big warning sign. And so this latest technology we're building figures out, well, is it 2% of the code? Is it 20? Is it 50? That even was involved with Gen AI, that originated with Gen AI, and then of that, how much of it got blended first? And broadly speaking, just the safe procedure is to make sure that Gen AI code gets the same level of review, everything else. It could be right, but you sure as heck need to give it the same quality review that you would any other piece of code.
Yeah, that would be a very interesting metric. Being out, having something that says, I think X% is AI generated, and everything else is, I don't want to say generated by your developers, but I guess I would say,
not Gen AI originated.
Yeah, thank you.
Could have come from your developers.
That's the best way to describe it.
Exactly.
I'm like, how do I say this without hand typed? No, that doesn't sound appropriate. Thank you. Yeah, that is it. That would be a fascinating metric. At the end of the day, I'm rationalizing to myself and saying it's no different than when you're choosing, to hire a new engineer, right? And hey, you might pick a good coder. You might pick a bad coder, right? and really at the end of that's what it comes down to, is when you choose to trust AI, it could give you phenomenally good results or maybe some bad results, but so could that bad engineer that you hired that said they were good on a resume, right? And, maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I'm starting to think about it.
Thinking of Gen AI as a junior engineer, I think, is a pretty good analogy. You want their help, but you need to check the quality of their work. You want to check the quality of their work. I will say the question of whether or not generative AI code will get intellectual property protection is a very serious one. And companies are very it's very sensible to have a thoughtful answer involving legal counsel on will we be able to own our code if we are using Gen AI. That is an extremely reasonable question. Sema's perspective, spending a lot of time on this, and again, we do not produce an LLM. That's not what we do. We help companies adopt AI responsibly. Our review is that Gen AI is absolutely safe from an intellectual property perspective, as long as companies follow proper safeguards, including giving developers the right kinds of tools. So we would never say you have to, as an enterprise, if you're not an open source business, you have to be able to own and protect your code, of course. But we do think it is absolutely possible to do so effectively. We have some white papers that you can give to the legal team to make sure, for your own legal team to double check. So again, we do think you should take the question seriously, but we think the answer is yes. Yes, it is safe to use an enterprise-grade tier of a Gen AI tool to help coders.
Yeah. And again, folks, we're going to put links in the show notes for a lot of these things, especially if you're new to these areas. Just the same as everything else. Before you start using these tools, educate yourself. So, Matt, I'm very conscious of your time, that we've spent together here. Is there anything else you'd like to cover or bring up as we start to close this out here?
This has been wonderful, Peter. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you so much for bringing just such a great, thoughtful conversation to this. Again, we will put lots of things in the show notes for you all. Go check them out. Go read them. I'm sure Matt will be only too happy to answer your questions. Reach out on the website as well. Again, we'll put a link in the show notes.
Absolutely.
So, Matt, thank you so much, my friend. It has been a truly wonderful conversation. Greatly appreciate you taking the time.
Peter, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. It was a treat.
Thank you. All right, folks, that's what we got for you here. Another great conversation. I think this is going to be another one of those classic episodes. With that, if you want to reach out to me, you know where to find me, compileswift.com. All the links are there for everything. Other than that, we will speak to you in the next episode.